My name is Helene de Rousseau, and I am the Vice President of Programs for the Faculty Women's Club. And we want to warmly welcome Secretary of State Shirley Weber as our speaker today. In addition, we would like to welcome Associate Vice Chancellor for Government and Community Relations, Jennifer Pouliakidis, and Associate Vice Chancellor of Alumni Affairs, Julie Stiles, who are joining us today, as well as a little under 200 UCLA participants from the Faculty Women's Club, Emeriti, and the Alumni Association. We're delighted you're all here today to join us for this exciting program. I will introduce Dr. Weber. She will speak for about 20 to 30 minutes and answer questions for about 15 minutes afterwards. We have solicited questions in advance, and time permitting, we will also take questions from the chat function, which can be entered at any time during the event and addressed to everyone. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce Secretary of State Weber. Dr. Shirley Nash Weber was nominated to serve as California Secretary of State by Governor Newsom on December 22nd, 2020, and sworn into office on January 29th of this year. She is California's first Black Secretary of State and only the fifth African-American to serve as a state constitutional officer in California's 170-year history. Dr. Weber was born to sharecroppers in Hope, Arkansas during the segregationist Jim Crow era. Her father, who left Arkansas after being threatened by a lynch mob, did not have the opportunity to vote until he was in his 30s. Her grandfather never voted, as custom and law in the South before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 systemically suppressed voting by Blacks. Although her family moved to California when she was 3 years old, it was her family's experience in the Jim Crow South that has driven her activism and her legislative work. She has fought to secure and expand civil rights for all Californians, including restoring voting rights for individuals who have completed their prison term. Secretary Weber attended UCLA, where she received her BA, her MA, and her PhD by the age of 26. Prior to receiving her doctorate, she became a professor at San Diego State University at the age of 23. She retired from the Department of Africana Studies after 40 years as a faculty member and serving several terms as department chair. Before her appointment as Secretary of State, Secretary Weber served 4 terms as an assembly member representing California's 79th Assembly District, which includes parts of the city of San Diego, as well as several cities and communities in the San Diego region. Dr. Weber also served as a member and chair of the San Diego Unified School District and has twice served as California elector, including chairing the California College of Presidential Electors on December 14th, 2020. From 2019 to 2020, she served as chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, which consists of the state's African-American legislators and has the goal of promoting equal opportunity for California's African-American community. Dr. Weber broke records during her tenure by garnering extraordinary support for CLBC's efforts and its projects. Much more detail about her legislative achievements can be found on the Secretary of State's website. But in summary, Dr. Weber's genuine passion and tireless quest for equality and fairness in all sectors of life have resulted in her pursuit of reforms in education and criminal justice. Secretary Weber is a mother of 2 adult children, 3 grandchildren, and was married for 29 years to the late Honorable Daniel Weber. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for speaking to us today.
Thank you very much. As you probably discovered, we've been in kind of a quandary. Our internet, someone has not messed with our internet, but basically has twisted up all of my various accounts and calendars. And so I've been trying to get on for the last 30 minutes or more. So fortunately I am on, but on a personal computer rather than my normal computer. But nonetheless, it's good to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to be a part of your meeting today, as you are meeting, and have often wondered what happened behind the doors of the UCLA's faculty club, and those that were there. I think probably once, for the 8 or 9 years I was at UCLA, I probably went inside of that club one time with a faculty member to see what was inside. But it's good to be with you. Thank you so very much for the invitation. These are obviously very busy and troubling times, and are demanding obviously the attention of all of us locally and around the world. As what's happening in Minnesota, but also what's happening in all of the other states of the nation with regards to where we are as a group. You've read my bio and know a little bit about my connections with this university. I'm a kid. I'm raised in the Pueblos and the projects of Los Angeles. And father came to California when I was just a few years old, 2 or 3 years old, as the youngest of 6 children at the time. And came here escaping from some issues of terrorism and harm to his life. He was a sharecropper. And it was determined that they were going to lynch him to make him an example of what happens when those people who fight back, who stand up for their rights, who fight for themselves. And as a result, my father had to be taken out of Hope, Arkansas in the middle of the night and put on a train to California, where my mother's mother had moved some years before. And then 3 or 4 months later, brought his family to California. He became a threat because he was demanding that he be paid his wages at the way station and not be cheated as he had been before. So I come out of a legacy and a family of those who stand up even in the midst of some difficult times and challenges, and was raised, as I said, in the Pueblos by my mother and father who could barely read, who was never allowed to go past the 5th and 6th grade because they felt that is as far as a young Black boy needed to go in Arkansas, because all he was going to do was work for them. And a mother who was passionate, and I think went as far as the 8th or 9th grade in Arkansas. So they came to California with a passion for education, a passion for social justice, and a demand that they participate in the process. And so they voted every day of their life, every election that ever existed in Los Angeles. And our home on 45th and Broadway actually became a polling place for many, many years. And my father took great pride in moving our furniture out of the house on every election and putting it in the back rooms so that people could comfortably vote in our living room. And my mother they took great pride in that, never was a bother. And those of us as kids knew that on election day, whether it was primary, a special election, or whatever it was in Los Angeles, that we had to go down the driveway to the back door because people were doing important business in the living room, and that was in business of voting. But that was embedded in me as a kid to respect the process of voting, to understand how powerful voting was, and understand the power of education. Those 2 things were extremely important. My father said very clearly that if you get a good education, that no one can take it from you. Regardless of what they do, they can never take away your degrees, your knowledge, your information. He also said that if you can't vote and if you can't participate in the process, then whatever you have attained in this life, others can take from you lawfully, because you have no ability to affect the laws that they make. And he felt very strongly about those 2 issues in our lives, and that was embedded in us in terms of the sense of dignity and purpose and those kinds of things. And so being the 6th of 8 children, there were 2 born in California. We're not sure if they're really our brothers and sisters because all of us were born at home, so we knew who our mother was. And so we wondered whether or not the county hospital in Los Angeles gave us the last 2 the right ones. And that's an ongoing family joke about them being so different sometimes than the rest of us. But as a family of 8, we had strong principles and strong values and strong expectations. And my father demanded that we all go to school. We didn't have to all go to college. We went to community college, a trade school or something. And when graduation occurred, it was always the proudest moment of his life. He never missed a graduation, and which meant in his profession, he was a hard laborer in the steel mills of Los Angeles, that he had to lose a half day's pay every graduation that occurred in his family. And he did that proudly. And in fact, it was the only time when he went into the office to to let them know he needed time off. The secretary would always say, it must be a graduation in the Nash family. And he would proudly say, yes, it is. And so, so I come out of that legacy. You know, UCLA was, and I take pride in the fact that one of the reasons why, probably the only reason why I ran for the legislature, because I was convinced that by my friend Tony Atkins, who's now President Pro Tem and who was speaker, going to become speaker at the time, that that California had been good to me, and that our schools were in peril, our communities were in peril because we were making laws and rules and regulations concerning our public schools and our post-secondary and our community colleges and universities without anyone who had a voice, who had any background in education in the legislature. And she convinced me somehow or another that I was a person who had been given an opportunity, not only with the K-12 experience of serving and leading in K-12 in terms of the school board, but also as a university professor who had built a program, had built an institution at San Diego State University, and had been blessed with an education that was second to none from UCLA. And I initially said, I'm done. It's been 40 years I've taught. I'm done. It's time for vacation. I had planned to build my house up in Jashi in West Africa. And but I felt so bad as I continued to watch the decline in what was happening in our schools, and realized that I had some additional responsibilities to take care of, and running for the legislature became that additional responsibility. And as I approached the challenge, as some of you read about the things I've done, it became very important to me that the issues of social justice and equality, as well as education, be at the forefront. You know, I have been one of the few members fighting for accountability in our public schools. And I guess, and as I tell them, because I came out of Holmes Avenue Elementary School, which was a school in the heart of the Pueblos of Los Angeles and East Los Angeles. And the teachers I had were absolutely phenomenal. Number one, who accepted no excuse for us not performing and competing at a world level, and made clear to us to understand that because we were poor and because we had certain social disadvantages that others saw, that we had to be excellent, because we would be expected to be twice as good, and that we would carry the burden of the race forward in everything that we did. And these teachers who came out of Texas and Mississippi and Alabama, they had come to California to teach, and they knew what discrimination was. They had felt it firsthand, and they instilled in us a desire to fight back and a desire to be excellent. And so when I approach the issue of public education in California, I approach it from the same position. I don't want excuses for kids not succeeding. I want reasons for them to succeed. You see, I could have easily said, well, you know, she's poor, her father can't read that well, he's almost semi-literate, they don't have a lot of books in their house, they don't have this, they don't have that, and that could have been the foundation for my life. And yet the teacher said, no, it is because of that, because your father cannot will you a job, your father cannot will you the company. You have to fight harder, and you have to be able to win. And it's that kind of reality that I think is so essential, that not only with the difficulty and hard struggle and the determination to push us forward, that it would happen. You know, I tell people, as we're facing this issue of a year of academic loss for kids. When I was in the 7th grade, I had a teacher who came to my school who didn't want to teach. And therefore, he spent the whole 7th grade telling us how he was frustrated that he wasn't a movie star. And so it sounded like great fun in the 7th grade. I thought, this is what junior high is going to be all about. And when I got to the 8th grade, and we'd all gotten good grades in that class, I had a teacher who had been watching us the whole year. And she tested us. And she said in the end, you know nothing about 7th grade literature or 7th grade grammar or any of those things that you need to know. And she said, and I refuse to let you go forward without that knowledge. So she called all our parents and said, your children don't know 7th grade English, and so therefore we're going to learn all of the 7th grade in the first semester. And so, which means you're going to have homework every night, every weekend, and every holiday. And we did. And we mastered the 7th grade English by the end of January. And then she said, now we will master 8th grade. And so we mastered 8th grade English the rest of the semester. She gave us no slack. She gave us no sympathy. She gave us instruction and support. And in the end, by the time we got to 9th grade, we were fine. She said, you are now ready for the 9th grade. Others could have said, it's not my fault. My job is to teach you 8th grade. You get it or you sink it or you swim. And so it was that kind of environment that I thought it continues to be essential. High expectations with a support system for young people. And so as a result, I've been one of the few who actually fight for teacher accountability, support for teachers, but also equally important support for kids. That I've been the child advocate in the Capitol to make sure that in our discussions about K-12 education, that we never lose sight of why we're there. As I used to tell folks on the school board, the school district is not an employment agency. We don't evaluate our success by how many people we employ. We're an educational institution, and we evaluate ourselves by the quality of education our children receive. And hiring people and having a great staff is essential, but it's only essential to the excellence that we produce. And we hire good teachers and we support good teachers. Why? Because we want them to do an excellent job. Not because we want to basically brag about the benefits that folks have in our institutions, but we want to brag about the product that's produced, the kids that come out that are sane, that are socially ready, as well as academically prepared to master the world. So it's been my honor to serve in this legislature and to continue to champion those issues of social justice. I'm looking at the issue now that's going on in Minneapolis, and some of you may know that much of my legislation has been dealing with that, the issue of use of lethal force, developing the most stringent method of lethal force so that no one should actually use lethal force unless it's absolutely necessary to save their life or the life of someone else, and not simply because they think they're afraid or it's reasonable. That we have one of the strongest lethal force laws in the nation, the only state that has that as its law. And so we're involved with that. The issues of racial profiling have been issues that I've been addressing, and as a result, we have now the data to see what is happening with racial profiling. And last year, of course, the two things: one was to get ethnic studies required from every graduate of the Cal State University, because as we talk about issues of race and equality and racism, people have to know each other. They have to know the history of others in order to be able to appreciate who they are, as well as to appreciate themselves. And so we got that bill passed, and now it's required. Over 500,000 students at the Cal State University in California will basically be required to take some ethnic studies. One of the numerous courses, just 3 units of it, that I believe will change their lives. Especially after I spent 40 years teaching it, I can see the transformation that occurs in the lives, not only of African-American young people, but of other students as well. My white students are different because they took classes in ethnic studies. They see the world differently. They interact with people differently, and they have a different sense of professionalism, of how they operate and the expectations they have for themselves and others. And so we were able to pass AB 1460, which is requiring ethnic studies from every graduate in the Cal State system. And lastly, of course, the Reparations Bill last year, 3121, which basically puts California in the forefront to begin to deal with the issue of racism and slavery in California, because California did have slavery, and California did support the fugitive slave laws in terms of making individuals be put back into slavery here in California. And so we are as equally culpable as other states with regards to slavery in this country and the legacy that it stands and it leaves in this country in terms of racism and the relationships that we have. So we have begun those processes. And as I said, I was very content to be a member of the legislature, had not sought Secretary of State position at all, and was looking forward to probably in 3 years retiring and going back to build this house in Ghana that I was supposed to be building. But the governor convinced me that being Secretary of State would be a pretty good thing. That not only would be good for me, but would be good for the state of California because of my family's history in dealing with and dealing with voting rights. And then my grandparents never got a chance to vote in the United States, who were in Arkansas. They died before the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And my father didn't vote until he was in his late 30s. And that my family's legacy of voting was pretty strong in terms of California and the expectations that I have for everyone to vote and to work to make that happen. So with that in mind, I became Secretary of State here in California. And it's been an interesting thing. I sometimes wonder, when I go places, why am I doing this versus something else? And it's become real apparent as we talk about where we are in California in voting. We experienced the most amazing turnout this past year. 80% of more of our registered voters actually went to vote. And it is amazing that occurred And it occurred for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, the force of Washington was of such that people felt they had to have their voice heard. They wanted to make a statement, and that was important. So sometimes negative things drive you to the polls. But I believe that in order to sustain votes, you have to have something positive that keeps you going, that it is really the issue of raising the critical issues in California or being a part of that legacy of voting that becomes important. So we had that working, but we also, for the first time, opened up the concept of voting to more people than ever before and made it easier for people to vote. The pandemic, with all of the negative things it's done, did do something positive. It made us really think carefully about how people vote and the importance of people voting. We had passed many voting laws back. I was chair of the elections committee at the legislature, and we had passed a number of laws concerning voting. We opened up the opportunity that Los Angeles has the Voting Choice Act, the VCA, in which they could have multiple ways in which people could vote. They'd have voting centers, they'd have more than one day to vote, and on and on. And so we had some states, some of our counties try that and liked it. Many did not because they were afraid of what would happen, or that it would be too difficult, or they didn't have the resources. Well, fortunately, because of the CARES Act, we got money, and the money that we in California we used was to basically make it possible for every county to have the Voting Choice Act, which meant they had 11 days for people to vote. We had every person in California mail a ballot. We claimed it was too difficult, too complicated. Everyone got a ballot in advance. Everyone had the choice to do mail-in ballots, or they had the choice to go in person. Everyone had a chance to vote 11 days before the election, so that and those kinds of things. And so interestingly enough, it created enough opportunity and choice that people actually took advantage of voting. So we're working to accomplish that goal, to make sure that we have choices for people to vote. And California has with our last Proposition 17 was one of the bills that I have been a joint author with, which basically allows those who are on parole to vote. They've served their time, they're out on parole that might take years to get off parole, but they should have the right to vote. So California passed Proposition 17 last year. And as a result, we have one of the broadest and most comprehensive right to vote laws in the nation, because anyone who is not in a prison in California and who is not and who is a citizen of California has a right to vote. Everyone has a right to vote except for those who are in prison in California, not in jail, but in prison, because if you're in jail, you can still vote. So we have one of the most comprehensive and expansive ways in which individuals can vote, and the population that can be included. Clearly that we should be happy that Proposition 18 is, that we had 80% of the vote. But like all good things, there's always the naysayers. There are those who are still wanting us to now clamp down on voting across the nation. And so you've seen recently, where once it was 200 and some, now it's 300 and some odd bills across the nation. With primary focus is to basically make it harder for people to vote. It says if you're going to use an absentee ballot, you have to have it notarized in advance. In some places, they want us to notarize your absentee ballot. They want to make sure that you can't give a person who's standing in a long line a glass of water in Georgia, because that may encourage them to stand even longer and vote, and they'd rather they go home. So the whole issue of voter suppression is very, very prevalent across the nation. Many of the bills that are passing are many of the bills being proposed in certain areas are passing. California doesn't have any of those. We'll have those bills proposed. They won't get out of committee in California. But so we don't have the voting suppression that occurs in other states, but oftentimes people try to convince us that there are other things, that it is good to have what they call voter ID. It's yet we've never seen any, we've not had any fraud related to voting, but the more barriers you put up, the more difficult it is. We've had folks to let us know that if you have voter ID, that they may not be able to vote because they don't have a birth certificate. They may be like me, born at home, although I ended with got a birth certificate, but there are a lot of folks who don't have birth certificates, who don't have the kind of official identification that people want them to have, and will not accept other forms of ID, like a school transcript or those kinds of things that you have when you're 4 and 5 years old. It verified how old you were at 4 and 5. And so as a result, there's an effort to try to clamp down on voting in California at some points. There's efforts to recall everybody, it seems like. I was on a call with one of my counties, and 3 out of the 5 board of supervisors, someone who's very wealthy, is trying to get them recalled. And because they don't like the decisions they're making on the board of supervisors concerning voting and social justice issues and those kinds of things. So that's happening across the state. With regards to people trying to, if they can't get laws passed in the legislature, because they know that that our legislature is 75% Democrat in the Assembly and in the Senate. So if you can't get it passed through the legislature, then what? You go to the recall. You go to some other forum to try to convince people that suppression is better. Those kinds of things that are there, and you have folks coming in from the state with lots of money, basically hiring folks to get petitions signed and so forth and so on to change California. So we're fighting that, obviously, every step of the way. We'll be helping those across the nation who are also struggling to make ends meet with regards to finding social justice as fairness for there. We will also, fortunately, be a part of a number of the various lawsuits and things that others are raising. We will continue to offer support briefs to those places that are struggling to keep justice in the forefront. But we will, in California, we're going to start talking, giving some town halls and other meetings, because it'll be important for people to know what these things really mean, what it means to have voter suppression, what it means when people are asking to put additional barriers up for folks to vote when there's no reason for those barriers, and why folks want to do this and to deny others the right to vote. It's interesting that people are not upset that so many people voted. They are more upset about who voted. The fact that these were people that traditionally don't vote. And when we were making it convenient for others in other states, some states that have had absentee ballots for seemed like forever, and had no problems with voter suppression. But once people start convincing African Americans to vote and turn their ballots in early, then we have a problem with absentee ballots. And so now folks want to restrict the use of ballots and those things. So as we move forward, these are some of the issues that we face. The Reparations Bill is moving forward in the legislature. The governor is selecting his 5 individuals to serve. The president pro tem, as well as the speaker, have selected their individuals to begin to look at what we face in California. How do we try to correct some of the inequities that exist? And how do we try to create a fair and juster kind of a society for all that's there and all that are involved? So I'm going to stop now because I know you have an agenda. But I thank you for the opportunity. More than happy to answer any questions that some of you may have concerning what we're doing, where we're going, and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Well, we're sorry that you had such difficulty getting access to our program today, but persistence is clearly a quality that you have, and we're glad that we finally were able to connect and to hear all of the wonderful things you have shared with us. In advance of our presentation today, we did solicit some questions from participants, and I'd like to share some of those with you today. One question was, what changes, if any, will be made in the election process for midterm elections? Are there any plans with regard to what's going to happen before the next midterm?
Well, one of the things that some of you know, we're doing a lot of special elections. And so for the special elections, we have ensured that everyone will still get a vote by mail ballot. We want to make sure that will happen. The legislature right now is in the process of debating elements of a bill that will hopefully put a lot of the things that we learned, like mail-in mail ballots and others, into practice for the midterm elections. We've also expanded the opportunity for folks to become what we call the BCAs, Voters Choice Act counties. And so we're having, I think, another 10 or 15 counties added. So about half of the counties in California will be BCA counties. We hope to have more than that as we go along, as counties choose to, and as the funding become available. So my understanding is that the legislature right now, and in my meeting with the chair of elections, is that we're working at some point. They'll probably have all of California that chooses to have a Voters Choice Act, that they will have absentee ballots, that they will have voting centers, they'll have ballot boxes at libraries and places that can be dropped off safely, those kinds of things. So we're working to do that because, as I pointed out to them, the reason why so many people voted, not only because of negative element, was because we did everything to say to people, it is important that you vote. We want you to vote. And we showed that we cared because we didn't say you can only vote on this day and this time and this little bit of space. We took away everybody's excuse for voting. People couldn't say I got to go to work because we do it on Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays now. People couldn't say, well, I don't know what it is. I haven't seen it yet. You got a ballot early in the mail. Well, I don't have time. I don't have transportation. Put it in the mail. We basically have taken away just about every excuse a person has for not voting. And people say they enjoyed that. They enjoyed the choices and the options that they had. And we want to continue to try to create those in the midterm election and surely by the presidential election.
Great. Well, I was about to ask you about the Safe at Home program. The question is, how is it working both before and during the pandemic? But could you tell us a little bit more about what's happening with that program?
Well, the program itself is fine in the state. I mean, it hasn't experienced anything that's been very negative with regards to COVID. In fact, we're discovering obviously more people need it than now than ever before, especially with the kind of isolation that people experience. Um, but so far, it's going well. We've been able to, when I've met with the staff, those who are involved in the program, who like the program, who find that it's helpful to them in terms of making sure they were able, is doing well. I think it's maybe up for reconsideration or up for additional reauthorization, but it's going well.
Well, it was heartening. It was heartening to see the executive order expanding it to the public health workers because they've been the focus of a lot of negative attention lately.
They have a lot of needs themselves, and quite often they put themselves out there for us and don't get their needs met as well. And there's been some, but it's a good program and obviously good enough because they want to expand it to the healthcare workers, and that'll be important. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the reparations bill.
Mm-hmm.
And as I understand it, very recently, the House of Representatives, the Judiciary Committee, just put forth introduced HR 40 again to examine this issue. Can you tell us a little bit about California leading the way here and then hopefully?
Well, they've had this bill in Washington, obviously, for I don't know how many years, 30, 40 years, that it's been introduced every year without it getting in much traction. And after last year before last, when they celebrated the 400th anniversary of the first African American who came to these shores, I decided that since Washington was having such a difficult time and California generally leads in most things, that we would do reparations. And because we had been informed by Jerry Brown and others for years of the California's history in terms of all African Americans out of California in the 1800s and all these things that we sometimes forget because we say that California was not a set of things that were that promoted and supported slavery in California, and slaves lived here. Fortunately, the bill in Washington is finally getting some attention. I don't know if it will survive to the extent that it will become a task force as we have in California. But we introduced the bill and we passed and was signed by Governor Newsom. And right now, as I said, it's a task force of 9 individuals. 4 have been chosen, 2 by the pro tem, 2 by the speaker, and there'll be 5 chosen by the funding through the legislature. So California will have a commission that will begin to ask the questions and raise issues. And I'm trying to get our universities to become our research groups and repositories for information so that people can see what the information is and the history is. Hopefully our archives here in the Secretary of State's office will also be involved. So we're getting ready for the 1st of January. The 1st of July is when the commission actually begins to meet and begin to grapple with a number of issues. We've given it a short time frame of a year to operate, knowing that it'll probably request an additional year. But we didn't want to give it a long term, happen in 5 years or something of that nature, because by then the legislature will have changed. People will have thought of something else, and we'll be in a completely different mode of thinking. And so the reparations bill will take place. I'm kind of pushing to make sure that the hearings and the activities of the Reparations Commission are public, that everyone gets a chance to see it, because with regards to what we're doing for reparations and those kinds of things, that we have to have everybody in California to understand what is taking place and why it is important. And so we will try to get everyone the information necessary to be able to participate and to see the hearings and engage in the discussion.
Great, great. And one last question, because we know your time is very limited and we don't want to take advantage, especially since you've had such difficulty today. But on a previous program, one of the Faculty Women's Club's programs, Senator Ben Allen talked to us about the challenges that presented by lobbying, campaign financing, and special interests. Do you foresee any changes to laws in those areas?
Now okay, so you told me about Ben Allen, told me about the problems of fundraising and those kinds of things. So what was the other part?
No, he talked about the challenges that those activities present to the legislative process. Do you foresee any changes to laws affecting lobbying, financial disclosure, campaign financing?
Well, we've done a lot of things, and the campaign financing group is in the Secretary of State's office. But there have been some things done. There've been every effort that has been to try to change our financing has not been very successful, unfortunately. People have tried to keep outside interest and folks who are giving huge amounts of money that are kind of hid, and so we don't know exactly where the money comes from, but it shows up in some format with these groups by these nebulous names, and so you have no idea that these are the people to save America from whatever, and who's actually funding it. So there's some efforts to try to get to that. Most of the efforts at reform have not been very successful in most recent years. The bills that come forward to try to limit the resources. There have been some at some local levels that have been successful, because some of them had the most lax rules. In San Diego, the community college had no limit on the amount of money any individual could give. And this was a small community college in San Diego, and people were giving him $20,000 and $30,000. So it was a one college community college system, and members were getting $20,000 and $30,000. Well, they were also doing the construction at the school as well. So we had a number of issues that people have reeled in, and there's been some reform in that, but it's not been enough reform, I think, to a certain extent, with regards to who can give and the amounts and those kinds of things, particularly in the independent realm where people can put money in together and you don't know where it comes from, and all of a sudden it's targeting individuals, and we have difficulty figuring out some of the very negative campaigning that generally occurs in those areas, and people are often swayed to vote for certain things that they have no knowledge of at all, but is being paid for by one source. And so trying to get that one source to be identified is extremely important, because we have lots of bills on smoking initiatives and discover it's all about the tobacco industry under some other name, and lots of commercials are done, and people think that it's someone else, and it's hard to then push them to understand exactly who is actually funding the campaign.
Yeah.
It's
Can I sneak in one last question about your goals as Secretary of State?
Sure. At this stage, my goal is particularly, well, each area is a little bit different, because the Secretary of State has business, it has nonprofits, it has archives, and all those things are generally run. And so we're trying to basically modernize most of them, make it easier for people to file papers, file forms, and those kinds of things. The most difficult piece, obviously, is the voting piece, and to make sure that our voting rights are secured, that there's no intimidation at the polls. We see some issues of that people talk about. Even though we have great turnout, even though we have 70% of Californians who are eligible to vote registered, I'm not content until we have 100%. And so, which means we will always have a lot of things to do. We're trying to make sure that the laws we pass, like Prop 17, that I've sent out letters to all of the folks who are on parole to say you can now vote. We are basically dealing with our criminal justice system that says when you let people out, register them to vote. So we're trying to make it easier to get to a higher level of percentage of those who are actually eligible to vote. Because you say, well, we got 70%, yeah, but there's still 30 missing, We got 80% of the 70% that turned out. Yeah, but there were still 20 people who didn't feel it was necessary to go to the polls or to vote, even though we made it very convenient. So my goal is that every Californian who is eligible to vote should be voting. And so that will keep me forever with a goal to try to make sure that our voting is safe, secure, and convenient for people so that they can and understand the necessity of voting. We're going to also try to kick off a very aggressive civic education campaign, hopefully in the fall, that will help our young people begin the process of understanding voting and maybe get them involved in some political process or some kind of activity that will help them to understand why voting is so important and what happens when you do vote, but also what happens when you don't vote.
Young people are our future.
Yes, yes, yes. And so we want to make sure that we give them that. And so the state superintendent is going to be working with us on some additional curriculum that will make it more exciting for young people to learn about the process of voting.
Well, that's just so fantastic. We look forward to hearing more. It has
Mm-hmm.
It has been a great pleasure to hear your thoughts today on such important issues, and we are honored to have had the time with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for being patient with all this technology. I appreciate it so much. You guys take care, have a good meeting, and maybe next time we won't have to do Zoom. Sounds great. All right.
Okay, we've all had the experience.
Too often. Listen, thank you very much. You guys have a good day. Thanks for the.
Thank you, Secretary Weber.
Thank you. Bye-bye.